Hey everyone, and welcome to the Abletontips channel. Today I'm going to be showing you how to produce a melodic house track using only stock Ableton Live devices and sounds from the PML library. My name is Matt Tinkler. I'm an Ableton certified trainer, educator, and YouTuber, and I'm super excited to be here on the Abletontips channel and breaking down this track for you. The track I'm going to be producing and breaking down is one that's been heavily requested across all of our channels, so without any further ado, let's jump right into it. So let's just zoom out here, scroll over, and start by copying over the kick by holding down Option or Control on Windows to bar 17. Let's loop this by selecting it, pressing Command or Control and L, and let's unfold the kick track, solo it so that we can take a listen. Just a very simple 4 on the floor kick pattern. If we double click the kick and open up the MIDI, we can see that this is just a single MIDI note playing here on C3 every single beat of the bar. And if we press Shift and Tab to switch our clip view to our device view, we can see that this is just a kick drum inside of a single instance of Simpler. Nothing really fancy going on here at all. Next, let's move on to the rest of the drums, starting with the clap sound here. So let's hold down Option or Control and drag over our clap sound to bar 17, solo the clap and take a listen. And much like the kick, we can see that it's just a really simple sample here inside of Simpler. And if I open up the MIDI clip by double clicking, we can see that we have just a MIDI note here happening basically every second and fourth beat of the bar, except for the fact that it's slightly moved to the left a little bit. So it starts before the kick drum, and that gives it this kind of pre-shifted feeling, which is really common in this type of music. Let's press Shift and Tab to switch back to our device view and unsolo the clap so that we can hear it in context with the kick, and you'll hear that it happens a little bit before the kick drum. And if we take a look at the sample of the clap itself, we can see these 2 spikes here at the start are what's kind of happening before the kick drum sound itself, and then this main hit here is what's hitting on the kick drum. Let's close up the clap and take a look at this clap loop right here. Hold down Option or Control, copy this over to bar 17, our new loop area, solo the clap loop and take a listen. And so this is just an audio loop. If I double click on the clip, we can see it opens up. We just have a clap on every 2 and 4. And then right before the last clap here on beat 4 of bar 2, we have this kind of little extra percussion sound, which is what's adding a little bit of extra feel to this loop. If I press Shift and Tab to switch back to the device view, you can see we have absolutely no audio effects going on here at all. And so all we're hearing is really just the raw sound of the clap loop. Next, let's close up this clap loop and move on to this toms here. Again, copy our tom MIDI clip over to our new loop here, solo the toms and take a listen. Let's start by looking at the MIDI clip for the toms here, which is just playing a pretty simple syncopated pattern. We have it happening just before beat 2, just after beat 2. That pattern is repeated, and the last kind of pattern here in this 2-bar loop is just slightly varied from the rest of the patterns. It's all playing on C3, so we're playing this tom sample back at the same pitch that it was recorded at. And lastly, it's also worth noting that we have a groove applied to this tom loop here, this PML DPV 6 percussion loop groove, which is a groove that's been extracted from one of the other loops in our drums. Let's press Shift and Tab to close up the clip view and just show you how we've done this. So you can see here, we've got this PML DPV 6 perc loop, and to apply the groove of this particular loop to the other sounds here, all we've done is just right click, clicked on Extract Grooves. Then that's extracted the groove from that particular audio loop, added it to our groove pool, and then we can select that groove in whatever MIDI clip we'd like, just by coming down to the groove options and selecting it from here. You can see that's the one we've just added, this -1 at the end of it. And it's also worth noting that in the groove pool, we've also adjusted the timing of the groove down from 100% to 64%. So it's just lightly applying the kind of timing variation of that groove that we've extracted to the MIDI clips that we're applying that groove to. Let's close up the browser with Option Command and B, so we have a little bit more screen to deal with here, and take a look at how we're processing this tom. So you can see we've got a few different bits of processing here, an EQ, a spectral resonator, and a glue compressor. If I select all of these by holding down Shift and clicking and then pressing 0 on my keyboard, we can hear what the tom sounds like just without the processing. And let's go through this processing one by one. You can see here we've just got a simple EQ8, removing some low frequencies, shaping the mids a little bit. We then have a spectral resonator, which is adding a little bit of interesting resonance to this sound on the root note of the track, which is E. And then we have some compression being applied with the glue compressor, just to level out the dynamics of this sound a little bit and shape its envelope. Let's move on from the toms, close it up, and go to this shakers track here. Let's copy over the shaker loop by again holding down Option or Control to our new loop, scroll up a little bit, press solo to hear these shakers in action. And once again, all that's going on here, if we double click on the shaker loop, is just a simple audio loop that we've just dragged into our session. And then if we press Shift and Tab, we can see we've got a single audio effect here on this shaker loop, which is this volume pump rack, which has a shaper Max for Live device connected to the gain control of a utility after it to kind of give it that pumping effect, almost like sidechain compression. If we turn off this volume pump, take a listen to it. And now if I turn that volume pump back on, you can hear that it's basically pumping in time with the beat of our track. Let's move on from the shaker loop to our first hi-hat. Let's solo this, and again, let's select the whole thing, hold down Option or Control, copy it over to our new loop, and take a listen. Once again, just a simple audio loop. If we double click on the clip, we can see we just have a simple loop. We have the groove applied here, but it's not really doing a huge amount in this particular instance. But one thing we are doing with the audio, if we zoom in right to the end of the loop, we can see we've just kind of repeated one of the sounds of this loop, which is just kind of this sound here, kind of in between these major hits, just to give it a little bit of a flourish at the end of the loop. And this just adds a nice little bit of variation. Let's zoom out and take a look at the processing going on here. Let's turn all of this off. We can see we have just an overdrive at the start to add a little bit of distortion to the sound. Without this overdrive, we have just our dry hi-hat loop. Then with the overdrive, nice and subtle. Then we have an EQ8, which is severely removing lots of low frequencies and shaping the kind of timbre of the sound here in these higher frequencies. Followed again by this volume pump shaper connected to a utility here to make it sound like there's some sidechain compression applied to these hi-hats, which helps it groove along with the rest of the drums, particularly the kick drum. Let's move on to this second hi-hat. Let's close up hi-hat 1, unfold hi-hat 2, and again hold down Option or Control to click and drag this over to our new loop, solo this, and take a listen. Just a really simple offbeat kind of shaker. If we double click, we can see we just have a single MIDI note playing on every single offbeat of the bar on C3, so we're playing back the sound at its originally recorded pitch. And if we switch to the device view, we can see it's again just a sample here inside of Simpler, but it is worth noting that we are sending this to a return track. If I open up my return tracks by holding down Option, Command, and R, we can see that we're sending this to a reverb, which is being applied in hybrid reverb that has some erosion and some EQ after it. We'll go through all the return tracks a little bit later on. Next, let's move on from hi-hat 2 and take a look at hi-hat 3. Copy this over to our new loop, again holding down Option or Control, press solo and take a listen. So we can see this is actually made up of a few different MIDI clips. If I open up this first one, we can see this is just a single 1-bar loop playing an interesting kind of syncopated pattern. And this is actually the same 1-bar loop that we've got here, here, and here, but we've just removed the second repetition of this loop every 4 bars to give it a little bit of variation. Let's switch to our device view and take a look at what's going on here. We just have a simple hi-hat kind of bell sound being played in this Simpler, followed by some processing. Let's turn off this processing and take a listen to the hi-hat just by itself. Then let's take a look at the processing. We can see that we've got a utility here, which if I turn on, we can see is set to right in this first drop-down menu. And what this is doing is basically making it so that we're only passing through the right side of the signal. And in effect, we're making this sound mono. In fact, if I go up to here and double click on the panning control to turn off the panning, it's currently panned 35 to the right, we can hear it's just set to mono. And it's doing this by just passing through the right side of the stereo signal. Let's reset our panning with Command or Control and Z to undo that, and then look at the next processing, which we can see is some reverb. Just a very small amount of reverb being applied here to give the sound some space, followed by some EQ to remove lows and highs, and just boost a little bit of these high mids. Just to make the sound a little bit less harsh and bright and a little bit more subtle in the context of the rest of the drums. Let's take a listen to everything we've got in context with the rest of the drums so far. So we've got this nice groove starting to go on here. Let's continue with the drums by taking a look at this ride track, and again copying this loop over to our new loop, soloing this track and taking a listen. So we can see if we double click on this, it's again just simply an audio loop that is actually looping just a beat of a longer kind of ride or hi-hat loop here. So instead of looping the entire thing, which if I turn off loop, we've just selected a small portion of this loop, looped it, and then had this be the sound. But of course, we do have some processing going on as well. Let's shift back to our device view, turn off all the processing, and take a look at the first bit, which we can see is again just this volume pumper here. Then we have an EQ8, which is just removing a lot of low frequencies, followed by a utility, which is doing the exact same thing that we were doing on the previous sample, just passing through the right side of the stereo signal. And this is followed by an auto pan, which is just panning the sound from left to right at a rate of half a bar. And that's giving this sound a bit of stereo width and a little bit more interest. Let's fully extend this loop out once again so it takes up the entirety of our new loop here, and move on to this perk loop number 1. Hold down Option or Control, click and drag this over and solo this perk loop. Let's fold up that ride and take a listen to our new loop. Double click and we can just see this is a simple audio loop. And this is the loop that we've extracted that groove from to use on some of our other MIDI clips inside of our session. In terms of processing, this is just really simple. We have an EQ8 removing low frequencies and high frequencies without this EQ, and with it. And then we're also sending a little bit of this sound to our return track B, which we can see is this hall reverb being applied with hybrid reverb, followed by a saturator and an EQ8. Let's close up this perk loop and take a look at our second percussion loop. Again, copy this over to our new loop, solo this and take a listen. Let's go ahead and turn off all of this processing first of all, open up our audio clip, and we can again see it's just a simple hi-hat loop that sounds like this. Let's switch back to our device view and take a look at the processing we've got going on. Starting with this utility, which again is doing that same thing that we were doing on the previous two tracks, just passing through the right side of the stereo signal. And if we pan this back to center, see it's currently panned to the left, we can hear it's now in mono. Let's undo that panning and take a look at the next processor, which is this reverb, which is just applying a nice, gentle, small reverb to the sound, followed by an EQ8, removing some low frequencies, a compressor to shape the envelope of the signal and just make it a little bit more consistent and less peaky. And this also really brings up the reverb that we've applied earlier on. And this is followed by another EQ8 to really shape the sound, pulling out some more low frequencies and just reducing some kind of less than ideal resonances in the sound. And of course, we have panned this track 30 to the left to just spread it out in the stereo spectrum. Next, let's take a look at these last two tracks, this noise fills and reverb clap, which are more so kind of effects or fills tracks than they are main drum sounds. Let's close up this perk loop 2 and start with the noise fills, solo this, copy the whole thing, and again, hold down Option or Command, or Control rather, and drag it over to bar 17, and take a listen to this, and the fill at the end. And this particular sound just adds a nice little bit of interest when it comes to the end of the loop. If we turn off the processing and double click on the audio clip right at the end, we can see this is actually part of a longer percussion loop. And we've just grabbed, again, just a small little bit of it, these first kind of 2 beats. And then we have a little bit extra happening at the very start of our loop. Let's switch back to the device view, solo this track, and without all the processing, it sounds like this. So to start off with, we have a vocoder here, which is set to the noise mode, and we've adjusted some settings here like the depth, the release, the formant, and the dry wet, just to make the sound a little bit noisier. Then we've followed this with an EQ8 to take out a lot of those low frequencies and quite intensely boost those higher frequencies to make it sound a lot noisier and harsher and cut through the mix a lot more. We're following this with a channel EQ, which is again bringing up a lot of those high frequencies to make it much brighter. And then following this with an overdrive to apply some distortion to the signal and again, make it even brighter. Lastly, we have a delay, which is really sending this sound out in space and making it carry over the rest of the loop, which makes its role as a transitionary kind of sound much more effective. Lastly, let's take a look at this reverb clap sound, solo this, copy this over to our new loop, and take a listen. And really all this is just a sample of a clap sound that's been reverbed out. We can double click this and see we've just cut it so that it doesn't carry over to the start of the loop. And there's absolutely no processing going on here whatsoever. Let's close this up and take a look at the last element of the drums, which is of course on the group where we have some group processing. Let's turn off all this processing. And it's worth noting, of course, that all this processing is applied to everything but the kick drum. So let's solo just this drums group and take a listen. We have a drum bus, which is applying some drive, some compression, adjusting the transients a little bit at a 50% dry wet. We have a glue compressor, which is applying some compression to the overall signal. But really only when those toms are hitting, and the way we're achieving this is with the low pass filter on the sidechain filter input. Then we have this breakdown filter, which we're not actually using at the moment, but this is something that we could automate throughout an entire arrangement. Which is a combination of a high pass filter and a low pass filter. And then we have this all followed by an EQ8, reducing or removing some low frequencies and reducing the impact of these kind of mid frequencies. Lastly, it's worth noting we're sending the entirety of the drums group to quite a few return tracks. Let's expand this and we can see that we're actually sending this whole drums group to this first return track, this room reverb, this last return track, which is this return overdrive here, which is applying some parallel distortion. And then we're also automating the send to this third return track, which is this long reverb towards the end of the loop. If I open up my automation mode with the A key on my keyboard, select this range, Command or Control and C, Command or Control and V to paste this to our new loop, take a listen to what this is doing to the sound. Right at the end of the loop, we're sending all of those drums to this long reverb and sending it out into space, which again is aiding in that transition. Now that we've gone through the drums, let's take a look at the bass. To start with, I'm going to copy over the bassline MIDI to our new loop and solo it so that we can take a listen. So this is a nice, warm, fuzzy, detuned kind of bass sound. Let's take a look at how it was made. First off, let's open up the MIDI clip and we can see we're starting down here on C, followed by E, up to A, and then up to the B. Now this track is actually in E minor, so having the main kind of chord here be the C is really interesting because it kind of makes it feel like it's never necessarily resolved, and it's a really nice feeling. So let's break down the sound a little bit. I'm gonna start by turning off all of this processing, press 0, and let's just take a look at the synth itself, this wavetable here. Before we do, I guess it's worth noting that we do have a pitch MIDI effect here before the wavetable, which is just bringing down the input MIDI by 1 octave before it hits the wavetable. But let's take a look at the synth itself. So this sound is pretty simple. It's made up of 2 oscillators. We have the first oscillator being a sawtooth wave, and the second oscillator also being basically a sawtooth wave that's playing 19 semitones higher, or 1 octave and a fifth higher than the first oscillator. Let's solo the bass line and take a listen to the synth just by itself. If I turn off oscillator 2, this is just our basic sawtooth wave that's running through this kind of modulated low pass filter. And then adding oscillator number 2 is where this sound really gets a lot of its character from. We're running both of these oscillators through a low pass filter, which is set to the PRD circuit mode at 24 dB per octave and has about 5 decibels of drive applied to it. But the interesting part about this is that this filter frequency is actually being modulated. And if we take a look at the matrix, we can see it's being modulated by envelope 2. If we click on envelope 2, we can see that this is the modulation curve being applied to this filter frequency. So it's opening up and then coming back down over time, which is giving it that kind of wub-like characteristic. Not only that, we can also see in the matrix, we have envelope 3 applying some movement to the pitch. If we take a look at envelope 3, we can see again, this kind of has that increase and decrease effect, except it's going in the opposite direction. It's actually going in a negative direction, so it's kind of going down, then back up a little bit, which is giving it that slide in effect. If we increase the intensity of this, you can really hear the effect of it. Let's undo that. We also can see that this is in mono, so we're only ever playing 1 note at once. Our amplitude envelope has a little bit of a fade in and then some decay to bring it down to a medium sustained level. But what's interesting here with this sound is that we also have the filter frequency and the global modulation amount being automated over time. If we open up the automation mode, we can see we have the filter 1 frequency going up and down and up again over time. And we also have this global modulation amount being automated to increase here on this last kind of bar, which increases the effect of both the envelope on the filter frequency and the envelope on the pitch as well. So this is a nice way to give some extra movement and interest to the sound. Let's move on to the processing. We can see here that we have 2 erosion devices, which are being used to add some noise to the sound, just very subtly. This low erosion is very, very subtle. And this high erosion is a little bit more noticeable. Again, it's a very, very subtle effect here to add just a little bit of noisiness to the sound. We're following this with an auto filter to reduce the level of those higher frequencies and tame the sound a bit. But we're also using this to apply some drive to the signal as well. Following this with a chorus ensemble to add some chorusing to the sound on the ensemble mode. And this gives us a little bit of stereo width and more of a detuned kind of effect, followed by an EQ8. And this EQ8 is actually in mid-side mode. If we take a look at the mode dropdown, you can see we're in M/S. And this allows us to apply a different EQ curve to the mid of the stereo signal and the side of the stereo signal. We can switch between seeing the mid here and the side using this edit button, M or S. So in the mid of the signal, we're applying this kind of an EQ curve to reduce some areas specifically in the low frequencies and then more generally in the low mids. And then in the side, we're simply removing any frequencies kind of below 200 Hertz, which is useful because of the chorus that we're applying just before the EQ. with the EQ off, and with it on. Again, a fairly subtle EQ movement. Next, we have a saturator, which because the signal is going quite loud, this saturator is doing some stuff without even having to apply any drive, and we do have it set to soft clip on the output as well. Lastly, we have this volume pump effect once again, which if we turn this on, we can see is just applying that kind of sidechain compression effect to the signal. And with this particular effect, it is worth noting that the shaper is set to remote mode, but the maximum value of the mapping is set to 50%, so that the gain of this utility never goes higher than 0 dB. So we're not increasing the level of the sound with this technique at all. We're simply using it to reduce the level of the sound, and so that it kind of ducks in relationship to this curve of the shaper. Lastly, we're sending this bass line to the return track A, which has some reverb, and to the return track E, which has that overdrive, that parallel distortion. Then in context with everything else, this is how the bass line sounds. Next, let's move on to the synths. So you can see we have this group of synths here. We have a few different synths going on. Let's start with this melody ARP. Let's unfold this, copy over this melody to our new loop, solo it, and take a listen. So this really nice, subtle, just repeated kind of sound. And the sound design and processing on this sound, you can see, is fairly complicated, so we won't go super in depth on it. But it is also worth noting that on the synths group, we do have some processing as well, which I'm just going to select and turn them all off so that we can hear the synths by themselves before we get to the processing at the end. Okay, so let's double click and open up the melody clip and take a look at the notes. We can see we're just oscillating between this E and C, then the F sharp and the A, the G and the G, F sharp, E, D, and F sharp. And this works in nicely with the chords that we'll talk about next. But before we do that, let's take a look at the synth sound itself. Now we can see there's a lot of processing going on in the sound, which is all contained inside of this instrument rack. We're starting off with this pitch effect, which is taking the pitch down 12 semitones of the incoming MIDI, followed by this initial instrument rack, which has a wavetable and a bunch of extra processing. Let's turn off all this extra processing here and all of the extra processing in the last bit of the rack and take a listen to just the raw wavetable. What you're going to hear is this really bright sawtooth wave-like sound, which is created with two oscillators, one oscillator on a sawtooth, the second oscillator on this kind of somewhere between sawtooth and square wave, which is just being blended in there very subtly, but a lot of the movement of the sound is coming from the movement of this low pass filter, which if we flick to our matrix, we can see is being modulated with envelope 2. And because this envelope has some attack and some decay and a lower sustain value, we get that kind of wubby characteristic. It is worth noting that if we go back to our amplitude envelope, we do have some release on the amp envelope of the sound, and we do have the wavetable set to poly mode, 8 voices, so that we can play 8 different voices at once. Let's move through the processing. We have the same erosion setup as we did with the bass line of this erosion in the low frequencies and the erosion in the high frequencies. Again, quite a subtle effect. And of course, we are sending this to our return tracks, some reverb and our return overdrive, which is why you're hearing some reverb applied to this sound. Just so that we can hear it dry, let's turn off this long reverb and move on to the next effect, which is this delay. And this delay is just applying a very subtle delay to the sound. We have a quarter note in the left side and an eighth note in the right, which is just giving the sound a little bit of width and space. And I realized I turned off the wrong return. I should have turned off return B, not return C. Next, we have the auto filter, which is removing a lot of those higher frequencies to reduce the harshness of the sound, followed by a reverb, just a fairly subtle one, giving the sound some more space, a second delay, which again has a different delay time for the left and the right sides to give it some more interesting rhythm and stereo space, an EQ8 to reduce and remove these kind of lower frequencies, boost some of these mid frequencies here, and again, reduce some lower mid frequencies as well. Just shaping the tone and timbre of the sound a little bit, followed by another EQ8, which is actually again in mid-side mode, and we're not doing anything in the mid, but if I flick to the side, we can see we're boosting the high frequencies in the side of the sound, which is quite effective considering the delay and reverb we've got before the EQ. Lastly, we have another auto filter, which is being used to remove those high frequencies, but this auto filter is actually being controlled by this frequency control macro at the beginning here in this rack. And if we open up the automation, right click, add a lane for each automated envelope, we can see that we're adjusting this auto filter's frequency just very subtly towards the end of this loop to just bring out the higher frequencies a little bit more, again, to aid in that transition. And this auto filter is really doing a lot for this sound to help fit it in the rest of the mix. Of course, we are also sending this to the B return track here, this hall reverb, and with that unmuted, we have the full sound. Next, let's move on to this detune pad sound. Let's copy over the chords, solo the track, and take a listen. Really nice, warm, fuzzy, detuned pad. Let's double click on the MIDI clip and take a look at the notes being played here. We have this kind of C major chord, followed by this E minor chord, an A minor chord, and a B minor chord. So fairly simple. These chords are spread across a few octaves to give them some nice space. And let's take a look at the sound itself. I'm going to turn off the processing, these 3 EQs. And we can also see that this pad is being sent to the D delay return track, so I'm going to mute that, and let's take a listen to the raw wavetable. Which even just by itself sounds really nice. We have oscillator 1 playing a sine wave, and oscillator 2 playing a sawtooth wave, both playing in exactly the same octave. We of course have a low pass filter applied to these 2 oscillators on 24 dB per octave on the PRD mode. No drive is being applied, but these filter circuits do apply some subtle saturation and shift in the harmonic content of the signal, even just by being applied. And we of course have some modulation being applied to the filter frequency with envelope 2. If we switch to the matrix, we can see that envelope 2 is adjusting the filter 1 frequency just a little bit. If I click on envelope 2, we can see we have this attack and decay to the sustain all the way basically right down the bottom. And if we take a look at the amp envelope, we can see we have a very similar thing going on with about 200 milliseconds of attack, a really long decay to a medium sustain, but then a fairly long release of about 3.5 seconds as well. And that's giving the sound a lot of movement and allowing the chords to kind of bleed into one another. Lastly though, on the wavetable, we can see the unison mode is set to shimmer. We have 3 voices at an amount of 19%, and this is really what's giving the pad that detuned quality. Take a listen to what it sounds like as I adjust this amount slider on this shimmer control. So an amount of 19% is where it was set to originally, and this is giving the sound a really nice amount of stereo width, buzz, detune, and warmth as well. Beyond that, the processing is fairly simple. We have 3 EQ8s. The first EQ8 here is just reducing the low frequencies or removing low frequencies and removing the high frequencies. The second EQ8 is doing a similar thing, but again is in the mid-side mode. In the mid, we are reducing a lot of low frequencies below kind of 800 Hertz. And then in the sides, we are not reducing the low frequencies as intensely, but we are boosting the high frequencies. So this is really shaping the stereo width and stereo content of the sound. And this EQ movement is doing quite a lot, as you can hear. Then we have another EQ8, which is just removing any more low frequencies kind of down below 150, 200 hertz. And this is set to stereo, so it's applying it to both the mid and sides of the sound. And this is just basically ensuring that there's nothing down here in the sub 100 hertz region. Lastly, we are of course sending this to this D delay return. If we unmute that, we can see we have a delay followed by a reverb and an EQ8 to shape the sound of it. And this is what it sounds like being sent into that delay. You can hear it trail out there as I stop the playback. Next, let's move on from this detuned pad, close up that and the melody ARP, and take a listen to this warm pad sound. I'm going to go ahead and copy this over to our new loop, and let's take a listen. So the MIDI of this sound, if we double click, we can see is playing exactly the same as the previous MIDI. And let's switch back to our device view. And funnily enough, this device here is actually exactly the same as the one that is being used for the melody ARP sound. If we unfold the devices, we can see we have a wavetable with the exact same settings pretty well as the melody ARP. There's just a little bit of a change in the low pass filter. We can see on the warm pad, this low pass filter is opened up slightly more and is not on 24 dB per octave, it's instead on 12 dB per octave. And then we have effectively the same processing going on as well. But for sake of a demonstration, let's mute all of this processing and again also mute the return that this is being sent to, which is the delay, and take a listen to the raw wavetable. So pretty much the biggest difference is just this filter and how the envelope 2 is being applied to this filter. It's a much longer, more drawn out movement with a very quick and sharp and steep decay so that it goes up slowly and then backs off quite quickly. There's a slower attack on the amplitude envelope as well as a longer release. And that is once again doing a very similar thing to the detune pad where the chords are now being allowed to kind of drag out over one another. If we take a look at the processing, we have now effectively exactly the same processing. We have these two erosions, the low frequency and high frequencies. A delay with very similar but not quite the same settings as the melody ARP, just a slightly different setting in the right side, giving it some nice stereo width and space, followed by an auto filter, which is again removing those high frequencies above about 10K. And also applying some drive to the signal. Then we have a reverb, which is adding some space to the sound. Another delay, which basically has exactly the same settings as the delay in the melody ARP. Two EQs, which are very similar to the EQs in the melody ARP. In fact, this second EQ isn't actually doing anything, so we could leave that turned off. We can see this first EQ is just removing those low frequencies, reducing those low mids, and again, boosting those mids. It's very, very similar to the EQ in the melody ARP sound. Then we have this auto filter, which is what's being controlled by this first macro in the overall rack. And this is being used to reduce the high frequencies and again, be automated over time. If we show the automation, right click on this, show the automation in a new lane, we can see it's just slowly increasing over the course of this loop to give it a little bit of variation and movement. And lastly, we have another EQ8, which is just being used to remove those low frequencies. And of course, we have this also being sent to the delay, which we can turn back on and hear this in its full glory. Let's move on to the next sound, which is this synthetic strings sound. Let's turn off this warm pad. Let's copy this synthetic strings over to our new loop and solo it, then take a listen. So this sound is actually one from the core Ableton Live library, this synthetic strings preset. We are of course doing some extra things to it though, like sending it to this room reverb and this return overdrive. So let's turn off both of these returns. go back to our synthetic strings and turn off these processes afterwards and take a listen to just the preset as it stands. So this is just a synthesized string patch. I'm not going to go through the preset, but if we do take a look at it, we can see it's just created in wavetable. There's some movement being applied. It's all macroed up here, and there's some chorus and some echo being applied as well to give this sound some interesting space in the stereo spectrum and also give it some space as if it's being applied in a room. Let's close up these devices, and after the synthetic strings, we have a corpus. If we turn this on, there's a few interesting settings here that we've applied with the corpus. The main thing is we have the corpus set to this string mode, and we also have the MIDI input for the corpus set to the warm pad sound. And what that's doing is effectively applying some resonance from the lowest MIDI note on the warm pad with this corpus effect. And it kind of almost makes it sound a little bit more strings-like at a higher dry wet value. And then this has just been blended in subtly at about 25%. A really nice, subtle, but nice effect. Next, let's take a look at this EQ8, which we can see is just being used to remove some low frequencies, boost some of these higher frequencies as well, and tame those really high frequencies. Just focusing the sound in on the high mid-range. And then we have this auto pan. I'm going to close up the corpus and the EQ and show you what's actually going on here with the auto pan. If I turn this on, you can see this is doing a lot for the sound. And why this is we actually have this envelope MIDI before this synthetic strings patch, which is applying some movement to the amount and rate controls of this auto pan based on the incoming MIDI. So whenever this envelope MIDI is receiving a MIDI signal, it's being used to adjust the amount and rate controls of the auto pan, increasing them and then decreasing them in line with this ADSR envelope in the envelope MIDI Max for Live device. And then on this envelope MIDI device, we are automating the amount control just very gently and subtly towards the end of the loop. So we can see it's just a little bit less in this last bit of the loop here. We're following this with an auto filter, which is just reducing some high frequencies. And then we actually have this envelope follower. Now this envelope follower, if I turn it on, isn't doing anything to this particular sound, but what it is doing is applying some adjustments to other sounds to help this sound stand out a little bit more. So this envelope follower is actually attached to the gain of some EQ nodes in the warm pad and in the detune pad. In the warm pad, it's attached to this node 3 on this last EQ8, and you can see that with this warm pad with the synthetic strings playing, this node 3 is being reduced in gain based on the envelope of the synthetic strings sound. And the same thing is going on with the detune pad, except I've turned off the node 3, so let's re-engage that. And you can see that we have exactly the same kind of movement going on, which is being triggered by the envelope follower on this synthetic string sound. And that's just helping the synthetic strings cut through these two sounds a little bit better. It's a subtle effect, but really useful when it comes to mixing these sounds. And lastly, with the synthetic string sound, we're of course sending it to this room reverb and to the parallel distortion, and altogether it sounds like this. Lastly, for the synths, we have this high string sound. Let's unfold this, fold up the synthetic strings, copy this over to our new loop, solo it, and take a listen. Once again, this is very simple. We're just using that synthetic strings preset followed by an EQ8, which is doing a lot of heavy lifting, allowing us to really focus in on these high frequencies. The MIDI is just playing a long and high E note, and then we're automating the volume control on this synthetic strings rack, which we can see increases over time. We're of course also sending this to the hall reverb and to this return overdrive, this parallel distortion, And that is really it for this sound. But before we take a listen to all the synths with everything else, let's jump into the synths processing, which we can see we have an EQ8, which is just being used to remove some low frequencies and reduce the level of some high frequencies. And if we solo all the synths together, we can hear what this sounds like. Followed by a glue compressor preset, this guitar lead solo on the glue compressor, which is applying some soft clipping and also just gentle compression across the entirety of the synths group. Followed by this air control EQ8, which is really just boosting some higher frequencies. And lastly, this volume pump device, which is again applying that kind of sidechain compression like pumping effect. And this, with all of the other elements we've brought in so far, sounds as such. Now that we've gone through all of the main synths in this synths group, let's take a look at the effects before we get to the main star of the show, which is this main ARP down here. Now the effects in this are fairly straightforward. Let's have a look at this ambience. Let's copy over to our new loop, solo this ambience, and take a listen. We can hear it's a very, very subtle background layer. If we turn off this processing, and just increase the volume of this track, we can hear what it's doing. It's just some train station ambience, which is being used to just apply a subtle background layer. Let's undo the change in the volume, take a look at this EQ8, which is just being used to remove some low frequencies. And then once again, we have this volume pump, which is being used to apply that sidechain compression volume pumping with the shaper and utility controls. This is being sent into the room reverb just to give it a little bit of space as well. Next, we have this reverse cymbal sound. Let's copy this over to our new loop and take a listen to what this sounds like by soloing it. And this has a little bit more going on for it. Let's turn off all this processing, turn off the return tracks that it's being sent to, and take a listen to it just by itself. If we take a look at the audio clip, we can see it's just this reversed ride cymbal, and we're using the fade feature of the audio clip inside the arrangement view just to fade it in over time. In the processing side of things, we have an EQ8 just being used to remove the low frequencies, boost some higher frequencies, an overdrive being used to apply some subtle distortion, a hybrid reverb, applying some space to the sound, quite a lot of space actually. An EQ8, once again, removing a lot of those low frequencies and kind of narrowing in on this high mid-range. A delay to give some interesting rhythm and space to the sound, particularly as it trails out over the start of the loop. And lastly, a utility, which we're automating the gain of to increase towards the end of the sound. And why this is important is it's also increasing the level of the delay, but as the delay trails out over the start of the loop, because the gain of the utility cuts back down to 0 dB, it's not really loud at the start, but it does increase in level towards the end of the loop. This then, of course, is being sent to this room reverb, return A, and this hall reverb, return B, to give the sound just a little bit more space. Let's close up the automation, close up the reverse cymbal, and take a look at this grain noise, which again is just a sample. Let's copy and paste this over, solo it to take a listen. And this is just a sample that we've used here to, again, apply some more texture, give some more texture to the loop. Same thing with this noise splash. Let's copy and paste this over to our new loop, solo this, take a listen. Just this kind of noise splash sound that's also being sent to this long reverb. And lastly, we have this build effects, which let's copy all of this over to our new loop, solo it and take a listen. If we take a look at the audio clip, we can see it's actually just this kind of riser audio clip. We are pitching it down by 1 semitone to match the key of the track. And then we are also running it through some processing. We have an auto filter and an EQ8, which are just being used to shape the tone of the sound. If we turn these off, particularly this auto filter is pulling in quite a little bit of work because we do have the filter frequency being automated over time to increase and open up. We have an EQ8 removing some low frequencies, boosting some of these high mids. And we're of course sending this to the long reverb return and this delay return as well to give the sound a lot more space. But there's still one element of the track to go, and that is the main star of the show, this main ARP sound. Let's copy and paste this over to our new loop, solo it, and take a listen to what it sounds like. So the sound itself is fairly simple, but it's a really nice sound. We can see it is running through some return tracks, so let's mute the return tracks B and E, which it's running through, mute this, and take a look at the MIDI first of all, which we can see is playing this really nice syncopated pattern, and we can see that the groove is also applied to this particular pattern because we do have some 16th note syncopation going on. And the melodic pattern mostly follows the kind of chords, that kind of ascending and descending pattern, but where this sound is really interesting is of course the actual sound itself. So let's take a look back at the device view and at this main instrument rack, which we can see has a lot of automation going on in this filter frequencies, this amp decay and time. If I open up the automation, you can even see that going on here. We have this time increasing over time, this filter frequency increasing over time, and we could even play around with these other filter frequencies just moving very slightly, and maybe the amp decay increasing slightly over time as well, potentially. But let's open up the rack and take a look at what's going on the inside. Let's close up this EQ8, chorus and delay and turn these off and turn our attention to the wavetable. So this is the wavetable by itself. Let's also turn off this particle diluter audio effect rack and take a look at what's going on with the wavetable. So we can see we have oscillator 1, which is just playing a sawtooth wave, oscillator 2, which is on this broken filter wavetable with a very high pulse width of about 80 or 90%. I think it was at 89. And this is just adding a little bit more interesting texture to the sound, and it's also playing 1 octave below the main oscillator. It's a very, very subtle addition, but it is adding some nice texture to the overall sound. Then we have some filtering, of course, being applied. We do have the first filter on a low pass filter, which has its filter frequency being adjusted, as we can see with the amplitude envelope, not with envelope 2 or envelope 3, but with the amplitude envelope. And this means that the filter movement is actually moving in time with the amplitude envelope, which gives it a nice cohesive feeling. If we switch to the amplitude envelope, we can see we have this sharp attack followed by a smoother decay, which is what's giving it this wubby feeling as it opens up. We have it set to mono as well. And really that's about it for the sound. We do have some drive, of course, applied to both of these filters, but let's move into the processing. Starting with this EQ8, we're using this to remove some low frequencies and just shape the overall sound a little bit. Followed by a chorus ensemble to add some nice stereo width and detuning to the sound as well. Then a delay, which is of course being used to apply some nice delay to the sound. We have a different delay time for the left speaker as well as the right speaker. We have some filtering being applied too, and this is what it sounds like with the delay. adds a bunch of really nice spaciousness to the sound. Now, lastly, we do have this audio effect rack, which is this particle diluter rack, which if we open this up, we can see is a bunch of parallel grain delays and reverb sent through an EQ, which is a really great way to add some cool space to this. But what we're not doing at the moment is actually automating this, which is something that I want to do now. So as we adjust this particle diluter knob, take a listen to what happens to the sound. We have this really nice, grainy, spacey element that comes in. And all that this macro control is doing is just reducing the level of the dry signal and increasing the level of the wet signal as I adjust it. It's also increasing the feedback of this first grain delay and the decay of the reverb, but really that's it. And it's just being used to add this really nice texture to the sound. And of course, it's something that we could automate over time as well. So we can see we have this as an automation lane already on our track, and I could potentially add some automation. Let's just right click and re-enable the automation for this sound to just add some interesting movement at certain points in the sound. Maybe towards the end of it, we could kind of increase it over time. And let's take a listen to what this does. Adds a lot of nice movement to the sound. And so where this sound really shines is as we start adjusting this particle diluter effect and all of these different parameters in the main instrument. Lastly, of course, if we close up the automation, we are sending this to the hall reverb and the parallel distortion, this return overdrive. And for the keen-eyed among you, you may have also noticed that we have applied a -7 millisecond track delay so that this it sits a little bit out of time with the main rest of the track. If you can't see the track delay in your arrangement view, you can simply go up to View, Arrangement Track Controls, and make sure Track Options is ticked, and then you'll be able to see the track options in your arrangement view. Before we look at arranging this out a little bit, let's take a look at the return track, starting with this room reverb, which is just a hybrid reverb set to 100% ret, followed by a bit of an erosion and an EQ8. If we solo this, we can hear it's adding some nice reverb room sound to the track. We have this hall reverb, which is a bit of a longer hybrid reverb, followed by a saturator and an EQ8 as well. Some different sounds being sent to this. We have the really long reverb, which is just being applied with Ableton Live's stock reverb, this bright long verb preset, followed by 2 EQs, one EQ8 to remove some low frequencies and the channel EQ to boost the highs. And mostly all that's being sent to that is the build effects and the whole drums, which is being sent to this using that automation towards the end of the loop. Then we have this delay, which is a 3/16 notes delay, followed by a reverb and an EQ8. This is primarily being used to add some space to those pads. We have this parallel distortion, which is being applied to a bunch of different sounds in the track. Just giving the track a little bit more warmth and fuzziness. And then of course we have some processing on the main track as well to just glue everything together. There's really only 2 things going on the main track. We have this glue compressor and the limiter set together in this loudness rack. If we turn this off, and then if we turn it back on, you can hear what this is doing to the track. By the way, if you're new to producing and want to learn Ableton Live inside and out, make sure to check out the PML Ableton Live Beginners to Advanced course over on the website. It'll teach you absolutely everything you need to know so that you can start creating your own music in Ableton Live. And so now that we've gone through the main loop, let's take a look at how we could turn this into a bit more of a full arrangement. Let's start just by adding some space. All I'm going to do is select, let's say 65 or maybe 81 bars, press Command or Control and I on my keyboard, and what that's going to do is insert a bunch of silence in that particular area. I'm going to increase the size of my grid with Command or Control and 2, so it's a little bit bigger. And let's start by creating a little bit of a template for our arrangement. At bar 1, I'm going to start with the intro, so I'm going to right click, add locator, say intro, and I want this to be quite a progressive arrangement. So I want to have the intro, let's say last actually until about bar 25, and this can be where the melody comes in full. And these bars from bar 9 to bar 25, these can be where the drums start to build up. So let's go drum build in this particular area. This section here can last for 8 bars, then maybe we can have a bit of a breakdown. Let's call that break. Or 16 bars rather. Then at bar 49, we could have a build up into bar 57, which is where the drop comes in. Then this drop can last for say 16 bars up until bar 73. This could be the drop part 2. And then maybe we have the outro beginning here at bar 81. So everything starts to fade out. And we have the track end at bar 89. Let's have this drop part 2 actually happen at bar 65 instead of bar 73. And now we can start filling in this template with all of the different sounds we have in our loop. Let's start with the drums. Let's just select all of these drums and copy them all to the drop part 2. And let's duplicate this again at bar 73. So we have drop part 2 basically being absolutely everything full swing. But over the course of the intro, we can build up the drums gradually. So let's start with the kick drum in the intro all the way until say the break. Let's maybe have clap 1 do the same. So the intro all the way through until the break. But let's build in everything else a little bit more gradually. Let's maybe have the toms come in halfway through this main intro. They can last again until the end of the break. We could do the same thing with the shakers all the way through until the end. Maybe this main hi-hat 1 can come in all the way at the start as well. And let's duplicate this all the way through till the end of the intro. But this hi-hat 2, maybe that can come in at bar 17. We can extend that along. And these hi-hat 3s here, maybe they can come in at this bar 25 area. Maybe we can reserve this ride for the drop part 2. We could bring in this first percussion loop, potentially at the start as well, all the way through to the break. But this second percussion loop, let's reserve that for, let's say, bar 25 until the break as well. Let's add in some of these noise fills, maybe at bar 17, bar 25, bar 33, and bar 41. And this reverb clap, let's maybe have that happen just before bar 41 and just before the drop as well. Speaking of this drop, let's have the kick drum happen with this clap. Well, let's also bring this clap loop in the intro here and have this clap loop go here as well. And at this drop part 1, let's basically bring in everything except for, say, the ride cymbal. Let's just copy this area over to here. Hi-hat 1, hi-hat number 3. So the ride can stay until drop part 2, but everything else can come in. And the kick can be extended through to the outro, maybe halfway. This clap can be extended right through to the end. Maybe the ride can as well. And you know what, maybe the entirety of all of these different drum sounds can go basically right through until the end of the track, except maybe we just have these percussion loops last halfway. Then throughout the break and the build up, we can have, say, the toms continue, the shakers continue. This hi-hat number 3 can last the whole way and just be a continuous loop. And same thing with this percussion 1. And then we can maybe bring in clap 1 halfway through the break and clap 2 at the start of the build up. And so now we've filled out this template nicely with the drums. Let's move on to all of the synths and effects. Let's start with the bass line, which can come in, let's say, where this drum build happens, pretty much all the way through. Let's not have it in the breakdown, but we can have it in the build-up and through the outro as well. Let's then go to our main chords, and this detune and warm pad can, let's say, happen pretty much the entire time. Let's just loop this out for the whole track. We can reserve these synthetic strings maybe for the last half of the track in this drop and drop part 2, maybe even through into the outro. This high string can come in maybe in the break, duplicate that for the build up, and potentially can come in drop part 2 as well. And then this melody up can come in here at the melody area, duplicate that. It can come in the build up, and maybe it can also come in drop part 2. In terms of effects, let's have the ambience just last the whole time. Let's just duplicate that all the way right through until the end. This reverse symbol can be used for transitions, so maybe from the drum build to the melody to the break, the build to the drop to the outro. Maybe we can use this grain noise just as a transition into the break. And this noise splash can be on the main drop and drop part 2, and potentially at bar 73 as well. And this build effects we can use maybe just in the build up. Lastly, this main ARP pluck sound I think can happen the entire time. Let's just duplicate this all the way right through to the end. But potentially we could vary it a bit. So let's have the first few bars of it, or bar or so, just duplicated right through until when the melody comes in here. Maybe in the break and the build up, we could select these and bring them all up 1 octave by selecting everything with Command or Control and A, and then pressing Shift and the up arrow on our keyboard. And then, as we said, a lot of this sound really comes from automating these different parameters. So let's open up the automation for our main ARP. Let's turn off this mixer speaker automation, and let's turn off the mixer track volume automation too. And let's delete most of this automation so that we can start from scratch. Let's start by adjusting this filter 1 frequency over the course of the intro and the drum build. Maybe it can increase nicely and then drop back down when the full thing comes in, and then increase a little bit towards the end here, come down during the break, start a little bit lower, increase over the build up, maybe not that intensely. And then at the drop, it can increase a little bit as it just increases continuously towards the end of drop part 2, and then backs right off towards the outro. Then we can use the second filter frequency to just continually increase over this whole first half of the track, and then basically do the exact same over the whole second half of the track as well. Maybe like up until the drop, in fact, so it's fully open during the drop, and then backs right back down during the outro like we have here. We can also do things with the time, like increase that towards the ends of some of these different sections, maybe towards the end of the drum build section, towards the end of the melody section, towards the end of the build section, and the end of drop 2. We can effectively copy this time control as well to the amp decay and increase maybe the lower values of this just a little bit so it's not super short in the decay. And then let's use this particle diluter to, again, just increase the effect towards these transitionary areas, just subtly, particularly maybe towards, say, the end of the drop part 2, and in the build-up, maybe even more in the build-up. And then in the outro as well, we can use it to really kind of fade out the track at the end. And you could obviously go through and refine the automation a little bit more, but let's take a listen to how this all sounds just by skipping through our arrangement a little bit. So there's obviously a lot more that we could do. We could add some filtering to the kick. We could add some adjustments to the automations for the different pad sounds here throughout. We can see that that automation hasn't copied, so we might want to, say, increase that at certain points in time or have that adjust over time throughout this track. We could add some filtering to the bass and maybe some high pass filter on the bass to reduce it in certain sections. But for the most part, I think that is sounding pretty cool. And that gives you an idea of how you might be able to arrange something like this out into a full track. If you'd like to learn more about how to create Melodic House tracks just like this one, make sure to check out the Melodic House Academy over on the PML website, which covers the full track creation process, mixing, mastering, label insights, and also comes with a whole bunch of really usable sounds. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and I'll catch you next time.